works.
Hello, hi. Katie, thank you so much for that introduction. That was really special, and this is a damn good turnout. Oh boy, I'm nervous. And I totally, at the last minute, totally just like scrapped what I was planning. I don't know if you saw the advertisement for this talk. It was like a huge mouthful, like a lot of isms, and yeah, thanks, Hugo. And I was, I guess like I haven't really like academic background. I went to law school. I'm an attorney. I'm actually a person who has a law license. And I was crafting these slides, and I'm like having this like lecture style like planning happening, and I'm like, you know what? This isn't that's not the way I want to present this conversation. Like, I don't want to lecture to you all. Like, I wasn't expecting. This is a huge upgrade from when I was in the Psychedelic Club of Denver. Joey knows I wasn't expecting a stage, a microphone. This feels a little othering, and so I'm hoping that this will still be able to like participate together, because that's my goal, is to just gauge where everyone is with this conversation, because it's a tricky one to navigate. I know I'm like talking all like auspiciously, like you'll understand what I mean when I start getting into it, but yeah, I really wanted this to be pretty open-ended, and I wanted to create a container, a brave container where we all feel comfortable speaking up, where we can come together and sit through our discomfort and be welcoming to each other, because to be completely honest, this conversation is going to require kind of an examination of your privilege, of your conditioning, and it will most likely elicit some difficult emotions, defensiveness, discomfort, and I think that this crowd might already understand that sometimes the most difficult experiences we have on psychedelics are some of the most pivotal in our growth. And so if you have any experience with ceremony or sitting through the tough parts of the psychedelic experience, I encourage you to maybe tap into some of those skills tonight. Just sitting with the discomfort, breathing if you can. And I'm telling you all this because I want you all to be informed enough to like consent to be here for this. And if you're not feeling like you really are ready to like kind of dig in and think critically and have this conversation with me, like, please, you can get up and leave at any time. You can get up and leave and come back. You can get up and move. You can dance. If like you raise your hand and be like, yeah, Joey, just move the energy, or I'll have check-in points throughout the talk and maybe offer some somatic cues to like help reground you and help you be here to receive. So does that sound okay with everyone? Is everyone feeling okay with that? Okay, sweet, thank you. And so like, who the heck am I, and like, why am I given this space to talk about this? I'll give you like a pretty sterile rundown of my background. It kind of bolsters my credibility in society, even though it makes me slightly uncomfortable. But has anyone heard of DanceSafe? Awesome. Okay, great. So I am DanceSafe's chief legal officer. We're a 501c3 public health nonprofit, and our mission is to promote health and safety and fulfilling experiences for people who use drugs in their communities. And so this talk isn't about harm reduction, but if you want to dive into harm reduction, please come see me and grab my business card, and we can chat in a different space. So that's why I'm here is through DanceSafe. Psychedelic Club of Denver was kind of my intro into DanceSafe. But I got into drug policy reform 10 years ago, 2012, through Students for Sensible Drug Policy, through my law school here at DU. So Colorado born and bred, I've never lived anywhere else. This is my home, this is my community. This is kind of where it all started for me. So I'm also founding member of the Psychedelic Bar Association, which is really awesome. Lawyers are finally getting on board. I've experienced a lot of harm in lawyer-dominated spaces, which is why I don't practice law anymore. And coming back into lawyer-dominated spaces through the Psychedelic Bar Association has been really, really reparative for me. And so, and then I also co-chair the Legalization and Regulation Committee of the Psychedelic Bar Association. So the psychedelic policy and the psychedelic liberation movement is very much a part of what I think about a lot, and where we are in this really unique point in history and what we could potentially harness with this momentum. And then, yeah, as Katie said, a founding member of this club. I helped draft the bylaws that are still in use today, and it's just really fantastic to be back here in this space and to see how much it's evolved. Oh my gosh, you guys, this is really great. So kudos to the new leaders. You guys are just really doing awesome things. I'm so glad I got a drink to take the edge off. Drugs, right? Okay. So, who showed up, like, who's here because they saw the title of this talk? Okay, most of you. Awesome. Well, good for you. I meant it to be edgy. I meant it to be attention grabbing, and hopefully that folks would show up for it. And so my goal tonight is for us to think critically about the psychedelic liberation movement, which includes all of this incredible momentum that we have in legalizing and regulating psychedelics, and how that movement is in relationship, or perhaps not, with the broader drug policy reform movement. And the goal of drug policy reform as a movement as a whole is to end the drug war. And the drug war is, at its core, a vehicle for racism, fear, and war industry. And the war on drugs impacts every single person in every aspect of life. And that includes housing, employment, student loans, medical access, you name it. And it impacts all of us. And we're really positioned in a unique place, all of us here, in this position of privilege, in this position of power. For those of you who are white, your white privilege, to be able to start seeing how the psychedelic policy movement can help aid in the ultimate goal of ending the drug war. Because it's a movement that you wouldn't think is inherently political, but it is. It's a very political movement, and it's happening within the structure of colonialism, of late-stage capitalism, of the dominant extractive culture, white supremacy. And so if our movement isn't addressing the structure in which it's moving forward in, the liberation that we all seek with the use of psychedelics is only ever going to be a byproduct of colonialism. And colonialism is oppression. And it means it's in a system that was inherently built to oppress certain people who use certain drugs. And we all might be thinking about how incredible this is, that we're moving forward. You know, cannabis was kind of the first domino to fall. And now we have psychedelics, and now we are starting to see this messaging around plant-based drugs, plant-based medicines, and I understand how healing those substances can be, but when we start drawing arbitrary lines between plant or natural medicines versus other drugs, what we're really doing is we are cementing in the idea in people's heads, the folks who don't really know about drugs, or the folks who are like just starting to come to it because of all this movement we've had in the psychedelic liberation movement. I just lost my train of thought. Hold on.
Cementing.
Synthetic.
Thank you. Yeah, cementing. Yes. So what we're doing, I really appreciate it. I told you it was gonna be. What we're doing is we're cementing the bifurcation of good drugs versus bad drugs, hard drugs versus soft drugs, natural drugs versus synthetic drugs. And what that's doing for the population who already stigmatize chaotic drug use, who stigmatize people who inject drugs, who stigmatize substances like cocaine or like methamphetamine or like heroin, which, by the way, arguably can all be considered plant medicines or plant-derived drugs. And we're making it harder for the drug policy reform movement, the goal to end the drug war, we're making it harder to do that. Because what we're doing is we're latching onto these substances that are like less scary to the public because they're starting to be studied, they're showing really incredible potential to heal, they're mind expanding, they expand your consciousness, the scope of your perception. And these folks are then like now continuing to like relegate these other substances into this like bad stigmatized category. And so we're further alienating our brothers and sisters who have relationships with substances like heroin, like methamphetamine, who are in Black and brown and indigenous and poor communities who have historically been systemically oppressed, and we're not doing anything to bring them in, and we're not doing anything to end the oppression that they face, and depending on the drugs that they choose. And so I want us to like start thinking about how we can build coalition with all drug users and not continue to enforce the stigma around the substances that aren't on the ballot, that aren't being talked about as plant medicines arbitrarily. Because what we seek from this is liberation, and we're all not actually going to be liberated until we're all liberated. And so what we can do now, and this is where the term psychedelic exceptionalism comes in, this is where the term molecular chauvinism comes in, this is where the term incrementalism comes in. There's all these isms that are like tied up into this, what I just said. Because we're finding like these like breakthroughs with psychedelics. And what that has the potential to do, and what I'm seeing it all the time in the psychedelic liberation movement, and what I'm not hearing or what's missing from these conversations is like, well, are psychedelics really exceptional? And like under certain settings, they can be. But that doesn't mean that your drug choice is better than anyone else's. You know, drugs are drugs. Drugs are molecules. It's called molecular agnosticism. They're just drugs. They're just molecules, right? And some of the molecules have higher risk profiles than other ones do. And a lot of that is wrapped around the context in which someone finds that molecule, right? But you can't like distinguish good molecules from bad molecules. It's all within context. It's all within the environment. It's all within the dominant systems in which people are forming relationships with these drugs. And so when we go around preaching, well, psychedelics are exceptional, they're better than the drugs that you take, they're better than fentanyl. I have a friend who is in so much chronic pain that the only way that she can have a quality of life is taking fentanyl every day, you know? Like, for me, I love psychedelics, but like I can only do them now with my psychotherapist. You know, I have pretty severe social anxiety, and so for me, psychedelics aren't exceptional in social settings. Cocaine is. It lowers my inhibition, it allows me to move through my social anxiety, it allows me to stay engaged, like in conversations and not shut down, and it helps me socialize all night. And so, you know, and like part of what's ironic about the folks that do embrace psychedelics as exceptional is that it's actually that mentality is rooted in ego, right? And isn't that totally contrary to what we're seeking with the use of psychedelics? And so it's like, we can do better, folks. We can do so much better, and it's possible, and we're seeing it. So instead of, so part of the incrementalism now that I'm talking about is this kind of picking and choosing of the substances we think that is most palatable to the public and trying to decriminalize and legalize. We left off so many substances on Prop 122. So many. I use synthetic 5-MeO-DMT intramuscularly with my psychotherapist. And it has the potential to be the most incredible healing tool. And you know why, folks? Because it's so short acting. It gets right to the point. And it's so short acting. And so instead of having to pay my therapists for 6 or 7 hours of their time to sit with me through MDMA, through ketamine, through psilocybin, 2.5 hours. And I'm in and out, and I'm driving back up to Leadville where I live. And that is so accessible, and there was nothing there, you know, it's just so arbitrary, the substances that were chosen. And so when we start to pick and choose drugs, we leave others out. We reinforce to the public that, like, these are the safer drugs, these are the better drugs, these are the cleaner drugs, these are the soft drugs. But we need to actually move as the movement. Like, psychedelic policy is now like starting to like create its own like bubble of a movement, and it's just like totally leaving behind the goal of ending the drug war, because that's really where the healing is going to happen. Like, we have so much, and that's another thing is like psychedelics. God, I like feel like I'm on my soapbox right now, you guys. I actually, you know what? I'm just gonna pause right there, just for a moment, and to check in with everyone. Is there anything anyone would like to share? How are you feeling? Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, I mean, I'm feeling okay. I had a question.
Yeah.
So, in what you're talking about, the fact that we're creating these separations between what is good and bad, what's acceptable and what's not, and the fact that given that there may have been some stuff that was left out of the proposition, what do you say to the idea of taking what we can get as opposed to nothing at all?
Yeah, totally. And that's like the main counter argument I hear. And so if folks were able to hear, what's your name? Ryan, if folks were able to hear Ryan, thank you for that. Pronouns? Okay. He basically asked, like, well, yeah, there's a lot left out of Prop 122, but like, isn't it good? Like, shouldn't we be taking what we can get, essentially, right? And that's like the main argument for incrementalism, and like I totally get that. Like that is how we have to move forward within the current structures. And so yes, and like how can we actually be revolutionary right now? Like how, like we're just like it's just a byproduct of the system, right? And like that's what's actually causing harm, is our dominant system. And so we can heal all we want. We can have this like saviorism attitude, be like everyone deserves healing, but like the legislature of Colorado gets so much say in how 122 is going to be implemented. And do you really think that they're going to create culturally humble spaces for the folks, for like people of color, essentially? You know, like who's actually going to have access to the healing that Prop 122 is going to provide? It's going to be privileged, predominantly white folks who have lots of resources, who haven't had a history of trauma related to the medical system and forced sterilizations, who don't have skepticism of being in these types of spaces. Like, it's what we can get. Can we take it? Should we take it? Maybe. But like all the energy and money that went into passing Prop 22 could have maybe gone to something that is like a direct solution to some of the most asinine parts of the drug war, which is like mass incarceration and getting people, you know, and a lot of who we arrest every day are nonviolent drug users for possession mostly. And so if we actually try to decriminalize all drugs, then that means there's arrests stop for possession for the most part. And that means that folks like are not going to be like entering into this system because of they're possessing any type of drugs. And that happened in Oregon. Like, it's possible. Like, it's happening. Like, Portugal decriminalized all drugs in 2001. And it's kind of like that Dutch model, right? It's not perfect. It's like the Dutch model of cannabis. Like, you can possess, you can buy, but you can't, like, there's nothing to address, like, the manufacturing, right? And that's, like, why people say we should legalize and regulate, because it's the only way to address safe supply. But yeah, and that's exactly what I want you all to think critically about tonight, is, like, is that what we accept? And, you know, like, I voted yes on 122. Like, I know that's what we have. But part of me is just like, how can we do better? And I think it starts with just this examination of our privilege as psychedelic users and being able to come out of the closet, and like, who are we leaving behind in the conversation? And that's why I had so much issue with the decriminalized nature messaging, because they were really like plant medicine or bust, like synthetics are bad. And I'm just like MDMA synthetic, LSD synthetic, like, you know, that's so arbitrary. So that's exactly the type of thinking I want to elicit tonight. Like, I don't know. Ashley, were you going to say something?
Well, I was just going to ask about the room section. So in the
Okay.
personal use section, my understanding was that when we decriminalized all forms of DMT, so folks can hear you.
So I was just going to ask about what your thoughts on the personal use section were, because it was my understanding that the personal use section decriminalizes all forms of DMT, and that includes 5-MeO and synthetic forms. And so how can we work within the context of the personal use section to really expand on these ideas?
Thank you for asking that. So unfortunately, and I'm pretty good friends. I'm actually, Josh Capel is the main drafter of Prop 122, and he's part of the Psychedelic Bar Association. And I interned for Josh, you know, back in law school. And so I got to ask him about that, and it's just NN-DMT. It doesn't actually include 5-MeO-DMT. But as far as capitalizing on the personal use, that's going to require a lot more effort. We have to go through the legislature to add more substances to what's already listed. And first it starts with psilocybin, right? And then a year later adds
No,
mescaline.
personal use, as soon as Polis signs it,
Yeah.
DMT, ibogaine, and mescaline, as well as psilocybin, will need to be criminalized across the state of
Oh,
Colorado.
perfect.
For personal use, transportation, you can purchase, you can gift, you can give away, you just can't sell.
So nice. Thank you for clarifying for that for me. Yeah, and that's great. But unfortunately, yeah, it is only NN, but it's like, you know, you could probably get away with it. Like, you know, come on. God.
Yeah, they look similar enough.
Can law enforcement tell the difference?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, if you're using the Ehrlich's reagent to test your substances, both 5-MeO-DMT and NN-DMT should turn purple for you, so there would be no way to actually determine that unless you sent it to a GCMS lab.
All right, well.
So, I see a hand up over here.
So I'm kind of wondering, your unwillingness to like separate, say, fentanyl from weed or mushrooms, does that come from like a more moral like place or like an evidence-based place? Because as a former alcoholic and drug addict, I can assure you the telling me what I'm doing is okay is the exact opposite of liberation. Like the more people that you surround doing these things that are harmful and destructive, I just don't see how you reached your idea on, you know, wanting to put fentanyl with mushrooms. I feel like that's kind of screwing the movement, because getting mushrooms, getting weed, getting these fun, you know, really, really high, like LD50 drugs, you know, that don't have any harmful side effects, is a whole different universe compared to fentanyl, heroin, meth. Like, you are never, ever, ever gonna convince somebody that fentanyl is good. One that either was like used to do it. The only people you're gonna convince that it's good are the people that are doing it. And I don't see that that is helpful. You know what I mean? Like, I've had quite a few issues and I haven't had a single drop to drink, a cigarette, or any dirty ass cocaine for like 8 months now.
Good for you.
And
Hell yeah.
I just think that that's kind of counterproductive. Like, you could use the psychedelics to get people to not want to do these things. Because I don't think stuff like heroin, meth, fentanyl, that stuff is never going to be good for society. Never. And I think saying it's a drug is kind of understating it. It's poison that's being pumped into this city and every other city, and it is a big problem. I know the media and the guy and everybody, you know, they got to make it a show, but like, it's a big problem, and I think you lose a lot of people when you do that, and I just don't know. So like,
Yeah, totally.
that comes from like a moral, it's just how you feel it should be, or you feel like an addict being told they're okay is healthy.
It comes from a harm reduction perspective where we're not, right, there's no binary, there's no good or bad. And it's taking into account that an abstinence-based approach isn't going to be for everyone. And it's also taking into account the reason why we have such a high addiction population and why folks are establishing problematic relationships with these substances, right? It's systemic. And we, in America, with our imperialist drug policies, we treat drug users like criminals. And what it does is it exacerbates the problem, because folks who have created these relationships with these substances are just further alienated. They're criminalized. It's not a public health issue at this point in the United States. And so folks are not receiving the compassion that they actually need. They don't have access to resources. They don't have access to housing. That, you know, it's this big spiral that all stems from our drug policies in the United States, right? It's not, we can't place, like, there's got to be some agency in someone wanting to get better, but we can't place the onus all on that person without thinking about the bigger picture, right? And so my point is not to like advocate for people to do fentanyl. My point to make is that we can't leave those folks out of the conversation. Because like you said, like if they can have access to the psychedelic therapies that can help them get better, that's amazing, but like, will they really?
Most likely, yeah.
You think?
Absolutely.
What about like the unhoused folks, like on the street, like who really, you know, have like a problem with heroin, you know? Like they're not gonna have the resources to access the legal psychedelic healing that Prop 122 is going to offer, you know?
Do you have any evidence to like support that? Because I mean, there's a really cool mushroom shop on Wadsworth. They're cheap. You can start growing mushrooms in a tent. I grow them in my bedroom. Where I smoke weed in there and stuff, and like they just grow.
Yeah.
I don't know. This is good. I think we disagree on a lot, which is good.
I was totally expecting that tonight. Yeah, totally.
But yeah, I don't know. I think there is a lot that needs to be done with like the drug problem, and it is a problem. And I honestly, I don't think, like I personally, like it kind of sounds like you want somebody who is selling fentanyl to get the same as somebody who's selling weed, which is nothing. And I don't think that is okay. I think that if you commit a horrible crime on a drug and you got this drug in your pocket, you need to go to jail. Like, if you're just going up frisking people, oh, but you got any pockets? Yeah, that's messed up.
Yeah.
But I just don't see the angle you're coming from, and I just don't feel there's a lot of evidence to that.
There is a tremendous amount of data around the harms of the drug war and drug prohibition.
Oh, I totally get that, but that's a much bigger issue. That's a red tape and bureaucracy.
Oh no, it's
and
very much the
government
same issue, I think. It all stems, all the issues that you're talking about stem from drug prohibition.
Yeah, but that came from the same systems that have been in place forever that have led us, you know, we're going to a nuclear war maybe, look at gas prices and stuff. Like.
That's what I'm saying.
That's what I'm saying.
So let's change that. Let's use psychedelics to change that.
I think it's really harmful to like, you know, one, put all the drugs together and then to make it such a like a race-based thing, you know, too. Because, what's that?
Well, you're either way you're putting it together. You're putting them all bad and all good. You're saying.
No, I want the separation. I want fentanyl to be over here and bad. You don't do that. It's bad. Like we all have. The government tells us how fast we can go on the road. Like, come on. Like, where you.
I want to address laws of like crime, not the actual drug itself.
I think one of the key components that I think what I'm hearing the differences in opinion. One of the big things that I think sticks out is the argument of are drugs or molecules themselves inherently bad, or is it the relationship in the context of the use of that drug? And I'm much more inclined to feel like drugs in and of themselves are just a substance, it's just a molecule, and you can't necessarily say that fentanyl is bad or good. The effects of the relationship or the way that it's used can certainly be bad or good. But I think that's part of rewriting the whole social narrative and looking at the foundation of what the big problem is. And I think, you know, kind of what I feel like maybe Madalyn is getting at is the foundation is what we need to really work on. And if we have a foundation of a set of morals in society that says that drugs are bad or some drugs are bad or others are not, it just muddies everything. And if we can just all come together and say drugs in and of themselves are not bad, it's the context or how they're used. And really, I've heard you say relationship, the relationship that that person has with those drugs. So I think that's a real big part of what the focus should be on.
I don't know.
Thank you.
We also have to remember that especially this notion of exceptionalism, that like psychedelics like LSD and mushrooms, they're psychotomimetics. So put it in the hands of someone who has mental health issues and not given the right system to help them, they could have a psychotic break. They could kill themselves. They could be very dangerous for their mental health. So I think it's important that we not glorify psychedelics in the same regard, because left to their own devices, they could actually be very dangerous for people if they don't have the right resources. So treatment centers and communities like this are super important.
Yeah, 100%. And also, psychedelics can be used to like reinforce views that are extremely harmful, like fascism views. You all know what happened when they stormed the Capitol, you know? And there was that one psychedelic bro in his headdress that was like fueled by his ego, that was fueled by psychedelic use. Like it, you know, like psychedelics aren't, they're only going to impact you in the context in which they're taken, just like any other drug. Just like my friend who has to take fentanyl for a quality of life, you know? And so
So you would say that's the same as the people in the tent I saw over here if I were at
what I'm
park?
saying is that we need to exercise some compassion for those folks and not leave them out of the conversation.
I understand that.
Yeah.
I think like drug addicts, they don't listen. And like say if my grandmother had come along and smacked me in the face and took my alcohol and took my drugs and said be good and I listened, that would have been the best thing ever. If she would have done that a long time ago, I wouldn't be where I am now, you know? And so I don't know, there is a point, like the term drug seems to be, like you have a very loose definition, like fentanyl is not a drug, it's poison. Like if I make something that literally kills you and just call it a drug, it's not a drug, okay?
It's actually a really useful medicine. They give it to women.
If I drank an entire bottle of alcohol, I would die.
Alcohol's terrible too.
Right, I know, but I just drank this and I'm fine. It's a calculated risk. Whereas the fentanyl, like you're using it for pain.
But we're not talking about in a medical setting, are we?
I mean,
the people who get it prescribed to them aren't going and getting their drug tested and getting it off the streets. That's what you deal with.
well, right. So what would be the scenario if it was not illegal and it was much more readily available to those who need it?
Do you think that would be good?
Not like over the counter per se. Like
Just okay.
What?
I don't know. That's a lot of people don't buy that. Like it's not okay to just be walking down the street on fentanyl.
So I want to thank you for pushing back, and I want to move on.
Yeah.
And I hear you, and this was the type of reaction that I was really hoping to just like to sit with, because those people who have substance use disorder, those folks aren't bad. They're troubled. They need help. They're ostracized from society. They don't have stable housing.
Right.
They probably suffer from mental health issues. Like, so instead of creating these like absolutes about them, like they don't listen, what they're doing is bad. Like maybe we can just like
addicts in general, not
so
just
we.
those people.
So this will be good, and I see folks. I promise I'll get to you. Like I have all night. One thing I do want to address. What's your name, friend? Manny. What Manny I think is bringing up another point that I won't go off on it, but what's really important and super related to this is language. And so there are studies actually about this now, and health care providers are starting to do this. We're starting to speak in first person now about drug users. So we're not using the term addicts anymore, because what that does is it takes the agency away from people to make their own decisions and have access to resources. So we're saying, because what they are is they're humans first, and at the core they're humans. So they're people with substance use disorders. They're people who inject drugs. They're people who use drugs. They're not drug addicts. They're not crackheads. They're not meth heads. They're humans. So I just wanted to point that out, and that might help shift things a little bit, and you and I have totally different life experiences, and I want to honor where you've been and where you are now, and really appreciate you pushing back and disagreeing. Like, I didn't want to be talking in a vacuum tonight, so I appreciate your input. Thanks, Manny. See hands and hands. Yeah.
I was interested in extending the conversation more into the specifics of the drug war, what that would mean. I know decriminalization obviously is one big, and we all understand that big factor.
Yeah.
But this reaches all the way up into our pharmaceutical industry, to the FDA, to the current regulation systems which we have in place, which are so old and so politically driven, right? And so I'm just wondering if you would expand your conversation to that a little bit from my edification.
Yeah, I can do that for sure. I just want to make sure if you have something related though to the conversation that's been happening back here. Before I go, because this might take, is that okay if I address his and then come to you?
Yeah, address his first.
Okay, cool. What's your name?
John.
John? So John was asking for me to like kind of elaborate on the impacts of the war on drugs and how it goes all the way up into the federal agencies, you know, like the FDA. And so, like, I guess I need a little more about what you're seeking.
Well, when we talk about ending the drug war,
yeah,
that seems like it's a complicated term, right? Because the drug war itself stems from so many different aspects of our government and policy. And so, I mean, like we're talking about illicit substances really, right here, but we could be talking also about substances that are controlled but prescribed. Many of them are along those lines. I just, when you say ending the drug war, I'm asking you to just expand on what all that would entail.
Great. Okay. So yeah, what does it mean to end the drug war? Like, what does that look like? And this is where, this is actually, I think, the crux of the issue for me. Because in the drug policy reform movement, in the circles that I'm in, and in all the folks who have done so much work around ending the drug war, like the Drug Policy Alliance. If you folks haven't heard of that organization, a really incredible resource. And they understand the intersectional approach, but what they are advocating, what most folks are advocating for, is the legalization and regulation of all drugs. And that, I like all drugs. And that is, in the current system, the only way we can deal with safe supply, right? That is regulating the quality of drugs is the only way we can eliminate the fentanyl crisis that we're seeing, you know? And I understand like why that's the answer. And so it's like, you can walk in and you can buy a gram of pure cocaine. How fucking cool would that be? From your corner shop, you know? It's like alcohol, right? But like, oh my God, I couldn't even imagine what pure cocaine would be like because you can't find it anywhere. So I'm not trying to source here, I promise. But you know, so that type of like that level of regulation, right? And we're talking all drugs, and that would ultimately be the end of the drug war because no one would be getting arrested for possession, distribution, manufacture. The band-aid to full legalization and regulation is the decriminalization of use and possession and of all drugs, which is what Oregon did. And what they're doing is they're diverting all of the money and the resources it would take to arrest those folks, and they're creating and they're pooling it into like a mental health resource pool so that there's actually more resources out. So like if you get caught with some heroin on you, you're not gonna get thrown in jail, you might get a slap on the wrist, but then you're gonna be able to have access to resources that help you. For me, it's kind of the same thing I'm up here talking about. It's like, okay, so legalization and regulation, if that's like the answer to ending war on drugs, like how is that actually going to create equitable access to these substances? You know, and so that's why I'm skeptical of legalizing and regulating all drugs, because I'm skeptical of the dominant systems, because the dominant systems are oppressive systems. This gentleman wanted to say something. I'm gonna come right back to you. Okay, was that sufficient?
Yeah, I just wanted to say one thing.
Yeah.
I think in order to do this, really, what you're also also, what has to happen simultaneously is we would have to change the medical pharmaceutical system as it currently exists.
Yeah.
Which would probably also mean going to a single payer system and so forth. To ever make all that happen and make that a equitable
Yes.
to the drug war, that would have to happen concurrently.
Absolutely.
And that's a big,
that's an undertaking, and and what John was saying is that in order to end the drug war, like we have to address the medicalization and the pharmaceutical like chokehold, and essentially move into a single payer like medical system, right? And I 100%, and that's why this issue is so intersectional, and that's part of what's missing from the psychedelic policy movement is this like understanding of the intersection of this movement with everything else that the drug war touches, right? So thank you so much for that.
Friend back here.
Hi.
Hi, my name is Rumsey. I was co-director of Decomposed Nature in Boulder.
Nice.
We were making lots of progress in Boulder in terms of getting decriminalization in the pipeline before a new approach came in and intercepted our process. But in that experience and working with city council members in Boulder in terms of dealing with where the political realities lie in terms of feasibility of pushing some decrim measure through the pipeline, it offered some pretty interesting perspectives because I just want to be really clear that everybody on our team with Decriminalized Nature Boulder is in full agreement that all drugs should be decriminalized.
That's awesome.
Like nobody in our team was of the mentality that, we should only decriminalize psychedelics and then leave everybody else behind. We were all basically in favor of the ultimate destination being decriminalizing all drugs. However, we ran into a bit of a conundrum where whenever we addressed, we would have meetings with members of the city council, the local elected leaders, and we would kind of like pass some ideas by them. We would meet with the most progressive members of the city council and basically say, all right, what are your feelings about decriminalizing all drugs versus decriminalizing these medicines where people have these testimonials coming forward speaking of personal transformation and whatnot. And we found that a lot of times whenever we would have people show up at the city council meetings to speak in favor of decriminalization, we could probably get 5 people to show up at a city council meeting to speak in favor of decriminalizing the natural psychedelics, whereas we'd also have another 10 people show up at the same city council meeting complaining about their kids finding needles by the park and people trying to sell their kids meth. So one of the readings we got from the city council members was if we stick with the psychedelics, we could probably get it through the pipeline, but the moment it becomes all drugs, they don't want to touch it. They don't want to risk the whole the political dilemma of putting forth something that will be unpopular amongst the more conservative constituents. So I guess what I'm trying to convey here is a lot of us are in alignment of what our final trajectory should be, what our final goal is. It's just a matter of the political pragmatics of getting there. And would it be fair to say that a good compromise is that we do want to see all drugs decriminalized, but what if the psychedelics are just the gateway drug for further decriminalization of all drugs?
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much. I think you just gave a very real world example of why we've adopted incrementalism in this fight, right? We're just not in a political environment where it's accessible to be like, well, we want to throw meth and heroin in on this too, Like we're just not there yet, and you're absolutely right. And I want to thank you for saying that because I haven't had the pleasure of interacting with many decrim nature folks who have adopted that idea. I've been in spaces with them where they're very much like plant medicine or die, synthetics, like just kind of demonizing synthetics in a way. And so I'm grateful that you all like have that understanding. And yeah, I mean, I think that like that's what I'm asking us to think about. Like, I don't have an answer. I'm just like, I know that that's like, yeah, we're moving forward with what's most like palatable, right? And there's a lot of places that probably like Boulder County that aren't ready for that full decrim discussion. But if we're aware of it and we just like continue chipping away at it, I think we can get to that point. You know, like we saw the whole state of Oregon be there, and so it's possible. And I think that Colorado is progressive enough where we can get there as well. Will you repeat your question, because I know it was something specific. Did I touch on it at all?
The question was, is it a fair compromise to just say that decriminalizing psychedelics is the gateway drug for further decriminalization, and it's not that once we succeed with that, we're just going to pack our bags, go home, and go to sleep. You know, we keep on doing the work and keep on being active and keep on pressuring for further decriminalization. But in a sense, it is incrementalism such that we pledge to continue doing the work for all drugs, rather than having this kind of like righteous psychedelics are better, and we're just gonna go home and go to sleep after we win psychedelics.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's honestly the only route forward, and that's like what I'm really trying to encourage, is that because we have to move forward in the way that we are incrementally, like that we don't lose sight of that messaging though. And I think that's where what's problematic in the movement are the folks that are adopting like the psychedelic belief, and then but also this elitism that psychedelics are the best, you know. And so I think that's what we should definitely be doing. Thank you for that. Back here.
I just wanted to add something to the previous conversation.
Yeah.
In addition to the obvious harm reduction and the destigmatization, just thought it should be noted that most substance use disorders are self-limited anyhow.
Are what?
Self-limited, they resolve themselves just through the course of time. You brought up cocaine. Cocaine, when it becomes a substance use disorder, we normally say it resolves itself regardless of whether it's powder cocaine, crack cocaine, in 3 to 5 years. And that's even though only about 25% of patients would actually seek care. So even those 75% that are dealing with the issue on their own normally resolve it. It's one of the only DSM criteria that actually sort of fixes itself. You know, I mean, obviously there are exceptions. You can do a hell of a lot of damage to yourself in 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
I think the drug war even exacerbates the length of that cure time, just because you're then embedded in this illegal culture.
Yeah.
You know, and the stigmatization and all of that problems.
Yeah, no, totally. Most of the drug use that is happening is non-problematic, and I think that's like something that is missed a lot of the time. Is like the problematic use population is like the vast minority of drug users, and that's what I'm saying is we can't leave those people behind. You had something.
Yeah. Kind of piggyback off your question. I want to make sure I get my words right. So I definitely agree with you that there are concerns to be had with the legalization model eating into existing power structures of our medical system. From a harm reductionist perspective, I know that safe supply is a really critical component. What do you think that looks like without commercialization and resale?
Yeah, it's Nate, right?
Yeah.
Nate asked, what does legalization, how do we address safe supply without the highly medicalization of it, the highly regulatory, without doing it, how we're doing it now, and turning psychedelics into the consumer-based model that cannabis went through, and
even outside of psychedelics.
Even outside of psychedelics, yeah, exactly. I don't know. I've thought a lot about this, and that's why I'm we have to burn the system and build it from the ground up where the communities have the power. That's honestly the only answer. Take a fucking Molotov cocktail to the fucking systems, y'all. And that's what I just want us to think about, because to me, the solution is giving the power back to communities. And communities have always looked out for each other. And it's the same, it's kind of along the same like philosophy or argument for abolition. Like, we can for sure regulate ourselves without cops. Like, we have, like, there are so many other people that can like handle situations that cops can't. And like, and so for me, it's like, yeah, how do we like just empower communities to take care of themselves? And so I've thought about like, what about like a full spectrum decrim model, where you decriminalize every step of the market with drugs. You decriminalize the manufacturing, and so like the only regulation that's around the manufacturing is like the regulation and the OSHA requirements around like the chemicals and the safety, you know. But like you decrim the manufacturing, you decriminalize the distribution, you decriminalize the possession and the use. And I think the downfall of that is that it will, like the communities will eventually regulate themselves. Right, like if you decriminalize manufacturing, like you'll be able to like be closer to who's making your drugs. And like if that person is like putting out terrible quality drugs, or like someone dies from a sample from you know that person's drugs, like people are not, it's like how the dark web, like the silk market regulated itself, right? Like it's a consumer, the consumers will regulate the supply. And there's just like a lot of pushback on that idea, but that's like all I've got. I don't think it's up, like we need way more diverse voices in this room. Like there are so many more like revolutionaries, especially within the Black liberation movement, that like have this down way better than I do. So like, yeah, I'm not sure, but let's listen to more people about it. Do you have ideas?
I don't. I mean, I'm with you a little bit. Like, I think there's a self-regulation. Again, that's through capitalist model, and there are like more harms along the way. Of course, regulation provides these initial safeguards that don't have the same growing pains. Yeah, something to think about.
It is.
Just one more little thing. So when you get the whole system broken down to this like base level you can rebuild back up on, do you think the person that's doing the fentanyl or the person making the fentanyl is going to be in control?
I don't know.
I think
I haven't thought about it from that angle.
Obvious. I think it's pretty obvious.
Yeah.
Who would be in control in that situation? So
yeah,
that
but I think
like
that.
Another form of...
Yeah, I think that power dynamic wouldn't be like in play as much though, because there would be so much more community support in like the system and the structures that I'm envisioning. So like there wouldn't really, like there would be less of a chance that someone would develop a problematic relationship with fentanyl. That's what I'm envisioning, right? Do you have?
I have several, so I was trying to tie it best to what we're currently talking about. I guess, oh boy. Oh, well, here's one. So, you know, there's been a couple talks of incrementalism and how in the unfortunate, you know, place where that's the political reality that instead of waiting until we are able to do all of them at once, we are like step by step taking one Band-Aid off or putting it on if you're healing a wound, I guess, but like slowly but surely putting fewer people in jail for fewer drugs. And obviously, for full transparency, I 100% agree that all should like be very minimal, or at very least decriminalized, because it's a health issue, not a criminal issue, and it's notably shown that if you throw someone in jail, it destabilizes their life and does not help them at all. In fact, it more likely makes it worse. Yeah. So that's very clear to me. But I think, how do you balance the incrementalism of policy and political environment with trying to further the message that this is all together, such that, so for example, is it finding the people who are most, you know, obviously not the people who are super against you, it's kind of like a climate change or any other debate. The people who are super against you probably will never be convinced, but is it finding the people who are in the middle or more on your side and then saying, okay, I love what you're doing with the, you know, cannabis and psychedelic space. Have you considered that there's a degree of propaganda that you've ingested that you haven't come to realize yet, just like many others have come to that realization on a few other things, but not all of them yet. Is that what you do? Do you approach those who are kind of hopeful for you, or like near you, but not completely far away? Is that how you balance incrementalism versus wanting it all at once?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's been something that's like been a struggle for the whole like decade I've been in this work, is how do you find the footing to get through to people? And I think in this way, like, that's why these conversations are so ripe, is because then we owe it to psychedelics, you know, like this is the gateway drug in a sense that, like, so people are getting more on board with drugs, like through psychedelics and through the science that's behind these drugs. And so I think that that's making it ripe for us to start thinking more critically about it, you know, and about how this would be, like, how the psychedelic policy is just like one part of like the bigger movement. And so yeah, for me it is starting with the folks that are like kind of one toe in, you know, who like might be able to get it, and then also just finding common ground with the folks that are radically opposed to you. I think everyone has been impacted by substance use disorder, whether personally or for someone they know, their parents. And I think like that's a good way to start examining like the bigger causes for that, you know? And I think about other like liberation movements, like the queer liberation movement, you know, it started to really get through to folks because people were coming out to their friends and their family, and so folks were like, oh, I know a gay person in my life, or I know a queer person in my life, and like they're not a demon, or you know what I mean? And so it was like humanizing the issue. And I think that for me, that's been one of the most effective ways to get through, is like humanizing it, right? And like I thought a lot about like, well, like what if I get the question tonight, like, well, why should I care? Like I have my liberation, I have my access to the substances, like why should I care about anyone else? And I think it just comes down to this, just like basic social movement theory, like basic liberation theory. It's like we're not all liberated, and like I'm not liberated until we're all liberated, right? And so yeah, I think that's a great start, is really kind of like starting with the folks that are like have that like tiny amount of like to being receptive to it, right? Yeah, and then it kind of just like it forms organically from there, you know.
Thanks for reminding me I think this is something like a takeaway in general. I've been told this about, you know, again, climate messaging or many other movements, is the normalizing aspect is actually surprisingly powerful. So
yeah.
Thank you for reminding me. I have tried to do that. I'm not posting it on LinkedIn right now, but like Twitter and stuff, yeah, sure. I'll talk about my psychedelic use, and I think that tends to help people realize, wait, this guy does that? Like, from what I know, he's not completely crazy or whatever other label you want to put that people might otherwise. Yeah. So I think that's important. I think the interesting thing that you said about, or that he said earlier about like the community regulation model or where that comes into things, like what you were suggesting kind of sounded like the libertarian element of like, you know, it self-regulates and stuff like that. And I think he almost touched on an interesting element of, it's almost like, you know, in a scenario where there is a power dynamic that already exists, to the element that you remove all safeguards at all, that power dynamic tends to persist. And I think it's kind of like it's interesting how to balance that. Like in the best case scenario, you do allow it to just regulate itself and it works. But if it doesn't, there's you know, when you find out someone made a bag badge, that person is a casualty of finding out. Whereas ideally, you know, the reason we regulate so many other things is because we want to stop and figure out. And there really is a back and forth there, and I think we've tended to lean towards the regulatory side of, you know, if we can test this thing and make sure that at the source where it's being made, it tends to be high quality, then we should do it. But I promise I'll shut up after this last one.
No, that's okay. Actually, will you speak to, you mind speaking in the microphone so other folks can hear you?
Yeah, so, whoa, that's very loud. The last question I was going to ask that I had on the deck was, so we've talked a lot about like the harms and the equalization or the, you know, exceptionalism versus them. I think I want to know, I mean, you don't have to draw a line, but I'm curious to what degree these things influence each other. So, you know, there's been many studies done on the overall societal versus personal harm of certain drugs, for example. And I mean, hilariously, of course, this is one of the worst ones. That has something to do with the access, but it also has something to do with the normalization of it. So that's kind of a weird, there's so many elements here, but so to what degree also could those studies be influenced by the factor of what the researchers think of those, like, drugs and usage, and because everybody stigmatizes certain uses, you're going to use it in private, you're going to have to buy it from shitty sources, you're going to have to do this. So I'm wondering, you know, there's all those factors influencing what you might rate the worst drug, but to the bottom drug. But I think the thing that I want to wash away and, you know, pretend you're in a scenario where all drugs are relatively all accepted and not, you know, the access is not particularly different, the, you know, stigma isn't particularly different. I think at some point, where do you also land on, so, you know, like he mentioned LD50 or like whatever, like I can only drink so much of this before I get alcohol poisoning. There's other things I would have to smoke like a barrel full of weed to die. So I think now also, like, you know, other things, you know, I can't take psychedelics every day. I could take other things every day and probably be cruising or even enjoy it. So I think, where do we, like, I think it is probably wrong to exclusively consider psychedelics exceptional, but I don't think people are wrong to point out the exceptional parts of them.
Right.
So I think where do we interact there, in the sense that there's very clearly anything from research to like personal experience showing what things are good about certain drugs and what things are very clearly bad, and which ones are, like, you know, easier to abuse versus harder to abuse, even in a scenario in which they're societally equal.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, what's your name?
Carl.
Carl. Yeah, Carl, I think that's where education comes in and harm reduction comes in. Because there are different profiles to these drugs, you know, there are different risk profiles, and I think that what's been lacking so desperately in society, and is kind of where DanceSafe, my organization, comes in, is to bridge the gap around the honest drug education that exists. And I think that when folks have total access to that information, that they have more agency over, like, deciding on what drug to take and why and when, you know.
And also, if you have a support system, you're less likely to use one in a damaging way.
Yeah, exactly. And if you have a support system, you're less likely to use it in a damaging way. Exactly.
All right, I'm done. I used enough minutes.
Okay. Was there someone that, were you waiting? Because you spoke. I just want to make sure everyone gets a chance. Okay, we're going to go to Jacob, and then we'll go to you, and we'll make our way back to you.
Yeah, I just wanted to get your, see if we could hear your thoughts on the wrongful death lawsuit that MAPS was found liable recently for the Lightning in a Bottle Festival. It's part of the Zendo project. A woman died, and their family sued Lightning in a Bottle and MAPS. And I just wonder what your thoughts are in terms of, is that going to create a chilling effect with other harm reduction organizations, and how do you see DanceSafe's moving forward with does it create a precedent, or is it an isolated case?
Yeah. Thank you, Jacob, for bringing that up. We had kind of agreed internally not to, like, speak publicly about it, but I'm happy to address it in this space with you all. And so, yeah, that was actually my first event with DanceSafe in 2017. So if folks aren't aware, does anyone not know about the case that Jacob was talking about? Okay, all right. So I think that this might take, okay. There has, up until this point, been no case law, which is known as precedent, right? So precedent is when there's essentially law created by the judicial system. So it's also known as common law, right? So it's not statutory law, but it's based on judges and juries' interpretations of a case that ultimately kind of lands as like how we wouldn't. It is used by lawyers to argue cases of similar issues, right? And it's really powerful. That's why the Roe v. Wade, the abortion precedent that was overturned, that was because it was precedent, and it was precedent at the Supreme Court level. That was like really binding law, right? And so case law is really, really important. And up until like last week, there had been no case law related to harm reduction. And that means that there's been no trials around wrongful deaths. And when I'm talking harm reduction, I'm talking from its origins. And harm reduction's origins go all the way back to the AIDS epidemic in the late 80s, early 90s, when there was just like no community resources, and people like came up and started to like advocate for each other. And so we've been able to like operate, people who offer harm reduction services have been able to operate with pretty low like risk of liability, because there hasn't actually been this type of case law before. And what Jacob is talking about, we all know MAPS. So part of MAPS is the Zendo project, which is a sanctuary project, and that means they set up at music festivals, and they offer sanctuary services for folks who are going through difficult or challenging psychological experiences, whether that's psychedelic induced or not. And DanceSafe often works hand in hand with the Zendo project at events like Burning Man. And we don't do sanctuary services. That's like a different, that's a specialized category of harm reduction. But what we do is the drug checking. And so the case that Jacob is referring to, there was a woman who died at Lightning in a Bottle in 2017 after she had been to the Zendo project. And she had been given sanctuary services by Zendo, which is a project of MAPS. And her parents sued MAPS, and they sued Lightning in a Bottle, the Do Lab, and they sued RGX Medical too. And RGX Medical and the Do Lab settled, and MAPS went to trial. And the verdict just came back last week, and the jury found in favor of the plaintiffs, which were the parents of the woman who died. And so Jacob brings up a really important point, that this is actually quite chilling, I think, for harm reduction in general, because it does create precedent. It creates case law that other folks can use to argue against harm reduction in other wrongful death cases like this. And so it has a really big impact on our services, on the services that other folks have. And so it's unfortunate, and I'm actually going to be digging more into like the actual implications of it as part of my role at DanceSafe. So I appreciate you bringing that up. It's like a pretty incredible, it's a really big development in what we do, and it actually adds more risk now to the services we offer. Because, for example, if someone comes to the DanceSafe, so DanceSafe is a chapter-based organization, and we set up booths at nightlife events and music festivals, and people can come get their drugs checked by DanceSafe. And so if someone came to the booth and had their drugs checked, and then later had a really bad experience or died, this case now means that we have more liability on our hands. So yeah, but I would be happy to talk more offline with you about that. I'm coming back over here.
Yeah, so...
Do you mind speaking into the microphone so folks can hear?
There was a lot of conversation about, incrementalism and going basically drug by drug. And I guess I'm wondering, on a legal level, looking at like same-sex marriage with Obergefell, is there a way to do some sort of end run around all of these, having to go state by state, and having to go drug by drug, and make some sort of constitutional argument, either using like the Fourth Amendment or maybe more radically the Ninth Amendment, to try to just sort of, establish some sort of right to personal bodily autonomy?
Thank you. What's your name?
Daniel.
Daniel? Thanks, Daniel. That was my grand idea in law school. I was in constitutional law, and I'm like, yo, because at the time, so I was like, at the time, DU Law is like cannabis queen, because I was like the first to come out of the closet about like cannabis. I was building my own cannabis law practice before I got disenfranchised with the cannabis law industry. But that was like my like, that was what I thought too. I was like, how, going through constitutional law and understanding the rights that we have under our Constitution, like, I was like, how could we not argue that using cannabis, like, it's the cognitive theory argument, right? Like, we have the autonomy, we're granted that autonomy by our Constitution. And so that's definitely been thrown around, but it has unfortunately not gotten any teeth, and I think that it's really hard to have standing to sue on those grounds.
But couldn't anybody who was arrested for possession make that argument?
Yeah, they can. They totally can. It hasn't been a viable argument, unfortunately. There's no precedent. It's really hard to find like attorneys that will follow through with that. And there might be a venue one day in the future where that would be like, where it would be ripe grounds to raise that argument. Like, that's how a lot of like the civil rights cases went. It was very strategic, but that just hasn't worked yet. Yeah. How am I on time, Katie? I just want 10 minutes? Okay, cool.
I was just curious, so say, we get our way, like, heroin and alcoholic coke, I can buy at 7-Eleven. Should I also be able to buy, antibiotics and, like, cancer medicine and albuterol? Like, are those, like, we cross that line when we get to weird areas where, like, they're not recreational, but, you need a prescription?
Yeah. Yeah. What's up? Or machine guns. We're not going there.
I think so.
Yeah, I mean that is outside the scope of like my theorizing, because it just like, I'm kind of thinking of it like it already seems so unattainable. But yeah, that's like definitely a pillar of this argument, right? And I think that goes into like my point about the intersection of these issues and like what levels the reform needs to actually happen on, and one of those levels is like the medical, the like westernized medical institute that needs reformed in a really major way. And so yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Katie, I know that you wanted to say something with your hand up.
And maybe this is a question for like the decriminalized nature of folks, but I just wanted to hear your take on why so many substances were left off of their like laundry list of supposed like natural medicines, like ketamine, which is already being used in therapeutic settings, psychedelic, like MDMA, like LSD, like some of those plant medicines. Love to throw cocaine on that list, but I guess it's a stretch.
Totally, and maybe our friend from Decrim Nature left, but my understanding is that they are focused on what like is very much like a derivative of plants, right? So like something that's like grows out of the ground, like fungi, you know, like cannabis, like, I mean, I don't, in my mind, I think that what they're conceptualizing it is that like nature is benign, you know, like these are substances that grow from the earth that are already naturally occurring, like, and so they're safer. We should be able to have the agency or the bodily autonomy to like use what is like nature is giving us, right? And I think that like at its core that like, you know, it's like a very wholesome argument. But like you've got to synthesize the DMT, you know, like you get like sure that's found in so many like different types of like grass varieties, but like you're doing some sort of science to that grass to get the DMT, right? Like, what about the coca leaf, right? Yeah, like, I mean, you could just chew on the coca leaf and it's wonderful, but like, you're gonna do some so like MDMA with the sassafras root. Like, there's other ways to manufacture MDMA without the sassafras root, which is great because that's like being harvested unsustainably. But like, I think what the root of that argument is like, well, it's nature, so like it's not bad, so let's like allow everyone access to it. And like at its core, like I believe in that, but the way that it's being messaged is that like it's like demonizing arbitrary, it's an arbitrary definition. Because if you get down to the root of it, like LSD is the ergo fungus, you know? And like even methamphetamine, like I'm blanking on the plant ephedra. Thanks, Jacob. Like even methamphetamine has like plant-based roots, you know? And so that was always my issue with the way that decriminalized nature like messaged their beliefs, is that they really did just like stick to this like arbitrary definition of what a plant medicine is, which, you know, it could be applied to anything. Alcohol's a fucking plant medicine. Like we're just fermenting like oats, yeah, exactly, or sugar, you know, like. So yeah, so thank you for bringing that up. I saw other hands shoot up. We're getting, yeah. Brian, I know you. I'm just trying to get to everyone that hasn't spoke, but we'll come back to you. That's fine. Yeah.
Oh, sweet. So suppose there's a drug that's really fun, super exciting, but it's straight poison. It'll definitely kill you in 5 years. Should it be legal or illegal?
I think that if it's not legal, it's gonna get out into the hands anyways. Like prohibition is not effective. So that drug's already on the market, my friend. You know, and it should be, what we should do instead is give everyone the information about it and let them choose if they want to take it or not. And if they do choose to take it, we're not gonna alienate them, and we're gonna be compassionate towards them, and we're gonna care about them, and we're gonna be like, hey, I know this drug is really fun, but like, let's just look at some of the consequences, right? You know, yeah. Because those drugs are already out there. Like, those are all the new psychoactive substances that are coming out on the market. Like, but the thing is like, if there wasn't drug prohibition, would people really want to like experiment with these other? The only reason like have all these fucking chemicals on the market is because all the precursors to MDMA became harder to get. So they started coming out with different substances. That's the reason why fentanyl's on the market, is because it's so much cheaper. Like it's because of the black market, the drug prohibition. It's like it's so much cheaper you can smuggle way more fentanyl, and it goes way further because like a small amount gets people high, you know? Like I don't think we would be asking that question if there wasn't drug prohibition.
You have 5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay.
You talk about giving everyone information so they can make their own decisions and making, you know, and decriminalizing things, but what about people that, you know, children or people that can't understand or absorb the information, or maybe don't read in the same language the information's like.
Yeah,
totally. That, you know, I mean, there's no autonomy without knowledge.
Yeah,
you know?
No, 100%. And I think that's where, so our organization is based on peer-based popular education, where it's peers educating peers, and you're both the student and the teacher, right? So like so much of our information, and this is why I didn't want to stand up here with slides and lecture at you guys, because it's like, that's why the DARE program was so ineffective, because it was cops coming into classrooms and telling kids, don't do drugs. Like, guess what? Kids are like, I'm fucking doing drugs. Like, you know? Like my colleague Mitchell, he was 13 years old going through the DARE program, and the cop was like talking about LSD, and he was like, I didn't even know LSD was still on the market. I'm gonna find me some. And, you know, so like it is. It's about like how do we educate people at a place where they can receive it? Yeah. And our work is based on the work of Paul Freire, who was this incredible philosopher from Portugal, who like has this whole theory about education. It's like, it's not like this power dynamic where like I'm, you know, the cop standing in front of the kids and saying don't do drugs. It's like we train peers to educate their own their peers, right? So when you come up to a DanceSafe booth, it's folks in your same age range. It's folks that like have similar interests as you. It's the safe and brave space where you can talk about highly stigmatized topics. And guess what? Like, our volunteers aren't going to know everything, but that's what they're trained to do, is be like, you know what, I don't know this, but let me find out. Or I don't know this, but here's a great resource for you to find it yourself. And so you're absolutely right. That's a huge component of harm reduction, is figuring out how we can get the message across. And that's not with cops.
No, I agree.
Sweet. I think I probably have time for maybe one more comment. And I know you two both wanted to speak again, and so that's great, right? If you want to say something.
Well, so my thing was, or rather what I was thinking about was when it comes to harm reduction, my understanding is that comes in the form of making sure that what you're taking is what you think it is, and also the relationship that you have to whatever it is that you're taking. Is there any other component to that harm reduction? I do have a follow-up.
Yeah, there's a whole lot, that goes into harm reduction, and I think at its core is meeting people where they're at. And I think, Manny, this comes back to like your point, like how do we meet the folks on the corner in the tents? Like, how do we meet them where they're at? And that goes like to the, I'm not well, like physically in the location, but like, and to the education piece, like we're not going to like, we're meeting people where they're at, and then like figuring out what they need in that moment. And so it's about understanding that drug use happens on a spectrum, and an abstinence-based approach isn't going to work for everyone. And it's all about like community resources. So folks have the resources they need to stay safe, to make better informed lifestyle choices. And I think that like, and that is like, for everything. There's harm reduction related to like sex and consent. Like, you know, there's harm reduction related to drug use. There's harm reduction related to driving your car. You put your seatbelt on, that's harm reduction, right? You going out into the sun and you put your sunscreen on, that's harm reduction. And so like it really is this like philosophy about reducing harm and risk, but also maximizing benefits, right? And I think that that's like something that we need to keep in mind too, is like drugs can like be fucking great for your health, you know, like drugs can bring you up into like the positive being, you know, and we don't, when that gets lost with where our culture is today.
The main reason I was asking is because in my view, the biggest component of harm reduction is the relationship that people have to the substances, and largely the reason that people have a messed up relationship with the substance is because of some kind of mental health issue, whether that's anxiety, depression, or even just more baseline avoidance.
Yeah.
And
self-medication. Like, yeah. Totally.
So is there a chance that we could actually fix the problem by doing something that's actually indirectly associated to the issue, because if we fix mental health problems, then all of a sudden people might not want to go to the bar every night after work and have a drink, because they realize that, you know, I actually have a valuable life without going to substance in my body.
It all comes down to trauma. We're all fucking traumatized, y'all. We have generations and generations and generations and generations of trauma. White bodies that colonized this country were fleeing a government-sanctioned brutality in England. Like, our ancestors who colonized this land were refugees from a very brutal white body against white body violence. Like, we're all disembodied. Like, white supremacy culture is disembodiment. Like, there's no way that our white-bodied ancestors could like watch black bodies being sold as property without having any type of reaction unless they were disembodied. And so what it does come down, that's like that's what anti-oppression is for me. That's why I'm like coming up here and being like, we need to change the systems, because and what it comes down to is like individual healing. Like, we need to decolonize ourselves, right? And because it's trauma, these people over here, Manny, like, they're traumatized, man. Like, that's why we formulate these that's why we have these relationships, right? And so, like, yeah, that's 100%. Like, if we start to figure out how to heal and heal the colonizer within, like, that's where we start to find that change, you know.
Can we just clap again? This was great. Give it up for yourselves too. Thanks for coming in here with some hot opinions. Thanks for, just feeling safe enough in this space to have these conversations.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, everybody, thank you for showing up tonight. We're gonna continue this conversation on Facebook, on the member Discord. If you had some more questions that you want to put out in the community, that's a good space for it. Please come and check out our merch table in the back. Ask us questions about memberships and all the good things, and that's it. Have a good night.